There is a moment in every conversation when the air changes, when a single sentence or glance shifts the tone and you feel the weight of choice. Your pulse quickens, your body leans forward, and somewhere in you, the voice rises that says, "Do not let this pass unanswered." It is an urge older than logic, an instinct built for survival that demands you push back, speak louder, defend your ground. Yet what if the real power is in not moving at all? Imagine sitting across from someone who throws the sharpest insult they can find, crafted to cut you, and you choose stillness. Not because you are frozen or uncertain, but because you know the value of letting their words hang in the air with no resistance to soften them. That silence does something neither of you can ignore. It unsettles them because you have not given them the reaction they expected. It gives you time to breathe, to decide, to remember what outcome you actually want from this exchange. This is the pause, and it is more than an empty gap between words. It is the space where you regain control of yourself, and in doing so, you control the direction of what happens next. People often mistake silence for weakness, but the truth is that it can be the most commanding statement you make. It says, "I am not here to play the game you want to play, and I will not be drawn into proving my strength on your terms." In a world that rewards quick comebacks and public victories, choosing stillness is a rare act of discipline. It requires knowing that your sense of self does not depend on winning every argument. It means you can hear disagreement without feeling diminished, and you can allow another person to hold a different perspective without trying to dismantle it. The pause is not retreat. It is a deliberate choice to stand in your own space until you are ready to move. When you understand this, you stop chasing control over others and start mastering the one thing you truly can control, which is yourself. This is where difficult conversations begin to transform. Not because the other person changes first, but because you have chosen to lead with your own restraint and clarity. Defensiveness is one of the most common reflexes in human interaction, yet it is also one of the most destructive. It creeps in the moment you hear something that stings, and before you even realize it, your tone shifts, your words harden, and the walls go up. This is where a conversation begins to unravel, because defensiveness does not invite understanding, it shuts it down. It turns the exchange into a mirror, reflecting the same guarded energy back and forth until both sides are convinced they are under attack. What begins as a simple statement becomes a cycle where each defensive remark fuels the next. The irony is that defensiveness often has less to do with what was said and more to do with what we assumed it meant. It is like locking yourself in a room and then feeling hurt that no one comes in, expecting the other person to understand you without ever opening the door to let them. In this state, you are focused entirely on protecting your own feelings with little regard for what the other person might need in that moment. The truth is that much of what sounds like aggression is actually a bid for connection. The volume is high because the emotion is high, and beneath the sharp words is often the desire to be heard and acknowledged. If you can recognize this, you can respond in a way that changes the course of the interaction. Disarming defensiveness in yourself begins with not taking everything personally. This is easier said than done, because when the stakes feel personal, our nervous system reacts as if we are in danger. But the choice to pause, to breathe, and to consider whether the comment truly defines you can be the difference between escalation and resolution. When you resist the urge to defend, you are not surrendering your truth. You are preserving your ability to communicate it clearly. You show that you are steady enough to let the other person speak without being pulled into their emotional storm. This shift not only keeps the conversation open, it signals that you are not chasing control by force, but holding it by choice. The absence of defensiveness is disarming. It changes the rhythm of the conversation, and it opens a door for the other person to lower their guard as well. In this space, both sides have a chance to actually hear each other, which is something that no amount of defensive argument can achieve. In most heated conversations, people are looking for an opponent. They want someone to push against so they can justify their own frustration, a person they can frame as the cause of their discomfort. When you give them that enemy, even unintentionally, you lock yourself into a role they have already written in their mind. But when you refuse to step into that role, the entire dynamic changes. You deny them the story they are trying to tell about you. This is not about being passive or avoiding the topic. It is about understanding that you are not obligated to meet someone's aggression with your own. You can hold your position without raising your voice. You can stand firm without turning the exchange into a battle. There is a quiet authority in responding to hostility with composure. It does not mean you agree. It does not mean you are yielding. It simply means you are not willing to become the character they need to fuel their anger. This forces the other person to confront their own emotions without the distraction of your retaliation. It also shifts the burden back to them to decide where the conversation will go next. Without an enemy to fight, their choices become clearer and often more revealing. I have seen this in courtrooms where opposing counsel tries to provoke a reaction, hoping I will match their heat so they can point to me as the problem. When I remain calm, when I refuse to give them the enemy they want, they are left to either de-escalate or expose themselves as the only one escalating. The same principle applies in personal relationships. A partner, friend, or family member may press you to react because your reaction gives them a reason to hold on to their own position. If you stay centered, you remove that justification. You do not have to announce that you are doing this. You simply let your behavior speak. Over time, people learn that they cannot pull you into unnecessary fights, and the dynamic begins to shift. By removing the enemy, you create space for the real issue to surface. It is in that space, not in the heat of conflict, where resolution can actually take root. Choosing peace in a heated moment is not weakness. It is an intentional act that requires more strength than most people realize. The world often tells us to push back, to meet force with force, to prove ourselves through quick comebacks and decisive blows. That is the script many of us have been handed, and it rewards visible victories rather than lasting harmony. Yet, if you step back and ask what you truly want from your interactions, the answer is rarely to win at any cost. More often, it is to protect your sense of calm, to preserve trust in your relationships, and to ensure that the conversation leads to something constructive. Peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to navigate conflict without being consumed by it. This begins long before the arguments start. It is found in the habits and decisions that keep you steady, in the choice to plan difficult conversations ahead of time so they do not spiral into chaos, in the discipline of taking care of your mental and emotional health so you are less vulnerable to provocation. When you value peace, you stop reacting to every challenge as if it is a threat to your identity. You start recognizing that not every comment requires a rebuttal. Not every disagreement needs to be settled in the moment. This is countercultural because most people measure strength by how loudly they can fight, not by how gracefully they can hold their ground. But when you choose peace, you send a different message. You say, I am secure enough to let you speak without needing to silence you. I am confident enough to listen without preparing my counterattack. That choice changes the temperature of the conversation. It signals that the goal is understanding, not domination. And over time, it transforms not only the way others speak to you, but also the way you see yourself. You begin to trust that you can face disagreement without losing your balance. You start to believe that protecting your peace is not only possible, but necessary. In doing so, you give yourself the best chance of walking away from a difficult conversation with clarity, dignity, and relationships that are still intact. One of the most powerful truths I have learned is that people can change, even in areas where they have felt stuck for years. I have seen this not in theory, but in practice. In courtrooms, in depositions, and in private conversations where someone walked in convinced they could never handle the pressure they were about to face. I have met clients who could not enter a room without trembling, whose voices cracked the moment they spoke, who believed their fear was permanent. Yet with time, patience, and specific tools, I have watched them walk into the same situations with calm and confidence, speaking clearly, holding eye contact, and refusing to be rattled. The transformation is rarely dramatic in the moment, but it is undeniable over time. It begins with small shifts, like remembering to breathe before responding, or learning to let silence carry its own weight. These skills might seem minor, yet they create a foundation for a completely different presence. This is why I believe so strongly in the possibility of change. It is not about becoming someone else, It is about removing the habits and reflexes that have been holding you back so that your best self can step forward. Culture often tells us that we are fixed, defined forever by our past experiences, our mistakes, or the labels given to us. I have seen the opposite. I have seen people discover that they are far more capable than they imagined once they learn how to regulate themselves in difficult moments. This belief does not come from wishful thinking. It comes from witnessing the process over and over. When someone learns to control themselves instead of trying to control others, something remarkable happens. They stop wasting energy on forcing the world to bend to them and start using that energy to shape their own responses. That shift is where real influence begins. People notice when you are steady in the storm. They feel the difference when you are more interested in clarity than in winning. And as they watch you, some will begin to believe they can do the same. This is how change spreads, not through lectures or demands, but through living proof that composure and confidence can be learned, practiced, and mastered. One of the most overlooked skills in handling emotional conversations is the ability to ask the right kind of question. Questions can either close a door or open one, and the way you frame them determines which will happen. A closed question assumes an answer, often leaving the other person with only yes or no as a response. It narrows the conversation, which can make the other person feel cornered. An open question, on the other hand, invites exploration. It begins with words like what or how, creating space for a fuller answer and showing that you are willing to listen. Instead of asking, "Did you go to the store yesterday?" which limits the answer, you might ask, "Where did you go yesterday?" allowing for more detail and direction. One of the most effective openers is to start with what is the chance? What is the chance we can talk about this issue today? What is the chance you would be willing to work through this with me? It is a simple shift, but it changes the tone from demand to curiosity. There is also power in avoiding why in certain contexts, because why can sometimes sound like an accusation. Unless you are conducting an investigation, leading with why can put people on the defensive before they even answer. In personal relationships, questions should be used not to trap someone in an inconsistency, but to understand what they are feeling or thinking. If people sense they are walking into a trap, they will guard themselves and the trust you need for resolution will fade. Asking the right questions is not about proving a point, it is about keeping the lines of communication open long enough to reach one. When you lead with curiosity, you lower the emotional temperature. You signal that your goal is not to win, but to understand. And in moments of high emotion, understanding is the bridge that keeps a conversation from collapsing under its own weight. By choosing your questions with care, you turn the conversation into a space where both sides can breathe, think, and speak with a better chance of finding common ground. Every conversation carries the risk of saying something you wish you could take back. In tense moments, words can escape faster than you can catch them, and once they are out, they cannot be erased. What you do next determines whether the damage grows or begins to heal. The fastest way to prevent a slip from becoming a wound is to own it immediately. If you say something unfair, unkind, or unhelpful, acknowledge it before the other person has to point it out. Say, "I should not have said that," or "that was not fair," or "that was unhelpful." By naming the offense, you remove the power of accusation. You show that you are aware, that you value the relationship enough to take responsibility without delay. This is not about humiliating yourself. It is about clearing the path forward before resentment has time to settle in. The longer you hold back an apology, the more it begins to harden the space between you and the other person. Some people avoid apologizing because they believe it will make them appear weak. In truth, the opposite is often the case. A prompt and sincere admission shows confidence. It says you are not so fragile that you need to defend every misstep. It also demonstrates respect because you are prioritizing the impact of your words over your own pride. In heated conversations, an unaddressed remark can sit like a thorn, even if the discussion moves on. It will be remembered long after the rest is forgotten. By speaking up quickly, you remove that thorn before it embeds too deeply. This simple act can reset the tone, making it possible to continue the exchange with more openness. The key is sincerity. A rushed apology given only to move past the moment will be heard for what it is. But a direct acknowledgement, delivered without excuses, creates a chance for trust to strengthen rather than weaken. In the end, the willingness to own your mistakes quickly is not a sign that you lose control. It is proof that you are in control enough to put the health of the conversation above the preservation of your ego. Disagreement is inevitable, but hostility is optional. The way you communicate a difference in perspective can either preserve the relationship or push it into unnecessary conflict. Many people feel that to disagree effectively, they must present a strong case, defend every detail, and make sure the other person knows exactly why they are wrong. In reality, disagreement can be expressed in far fewer words with far less friction. Simple phrases like, "I see things differently," "I take another approach," or "I tend to lean the opposite" can carry the message without inviting a fight. These statements hold your position without attacking the other person's. They do not demand that the other person change their mind. They simply make clear that you hold a different view. This approach is especially useful when dealing with people who thrive on confrontation or who carry traits of manipulation or narcissism. Giving them long explanations can provide them with more opportunities to twist your words or prolong the conflict. By keeping your disagreement concise and calm, you protect both your position and your energy. The key is to deliver your words in a steady tone, free from sarcasm or irritation, because the delivery shapes the impact as much as the content. When you can state your difference without raising the emotional temperature, you shift the conversation away from personal attacks and toward a recognition of boundaries. This also reduces the likelihood of retaliation, because you have not thrown fuel onto the fire. Over time, people learn that they can disagree with you without expecting a fight, which creates space for more honest exchanges. It is not about avoiding strong opinions. It is about presenting them in a way that leaves room for respect to remain. The ability to disagree without hostility is a mark of discipline. It shows that you value the health of the connection more than the temporary satisfaction of proving someone wrong. And in many cases, it is the difference between a disagreement that ends with mutual respect and one that leaves both sides more distant than before. True detachment in a conversation does not come from fear or avoidance. It comes from knowing you have the ability to fight back, but choosing not to. There is a difference between staying silent because you have nothing to offer and staying silent because you understand that speaking would take you down a road with no value. Detachment is most powerful when it is rooted in strength. It is the moment you recognize that you could strike with words sharp enough to wound, that you could expose weaknesses or dig into past pain, yet you decide to keep that power in reserve. This choice is not about pretending the weapons are not there. It is about knowing that using them would cost more than it would gain. People often mistake restraint for lack of ability, but the truth is that only those who know they can respond forcefully can fully appreciate the impact of choosing not to. This kind of detachment allows you to step outside the immediate rush of emotion and see the interaction as if you were watching it from a distance. You become both participant and observer, aware of the patterns unfolding without being swept away by them. In this position, you can measure your words. You can decide whether the outcome you want is served by speaking or by letting silence do the work. Detachment from strength is not the same as withdrawal. You remain engaged, you listen, you process, but you are not hooked by the need to react. You can let provocations pass without feeling diminished because you know they do not define you. This stance not only protects your own peace, but often unsettles those who expect to control the conversation through pressure. When they realize their tactics are ineffective, the dynamic begins to shift. In time, they may even adjust their approach because they understand that escalation will not draw you in. Holding this kind of steady presence is not easy, but it is one of the clearest signals of confidence and maturity you can send in a difficult exchange. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep everyone out. They are lines that protect the health of the relationship and the stability of your own mind. When you deal with someone who is rude, manipulative, or prone to crossing limits, the way you set and communicate boundaries becomes critical. One of the most effective approaches is to begin with I instead of you. Statements that start with you often sound like accusations and can provoke defensiveness. "You cannot talk to me that way" will usually meet resistance. but I do not accept that tone keeps the focus on your choice rather than their character. By framing your response around what you will or will not engage with, you make it clear that you control your own participation in the conversation. Difficult people often test boundaries to see if you will back down. If you respond with hesitation or vague language, they are likely to push further. This is why clarity matters. A phrase like "I do not respond to comments like that" leaves little room for interpretation. You can also pair boundaries with consequences stated calmly and without threat. "If this continues, I will end the conversation" is direct and actionable. It signals that you are prepared to follow through, which is what gives a boundary its strength. With certain relationships, such as with elderly parents or long-standing family ties, boundaries can feel heavier because they may lead to real consequences, such as cutting short a visit or declining an invitation. It is important to accept that setting a boundary does not guarantee a smooth reaction. People may become upset, deny wrongdoing, or try to guilt you into lowering your guard. Your task is not to control their response, but to remain consistent in your own. Boundaries are ultimately an expression of self-respect. They remind others how you expect to be treated and remind yourself that you are responsible for protecting your own emotional well-being. Over time, those who value the relationship will learn to work within those boundaries, while those who refuse to will reveal how much they truly respect the connection. When a conversation turns sharp, one of the most effective ways to regain balance is to turn the pressure back into curiosity. Reflective questions take the energy of a hurtful or provocative statement and hold it up like a mirror for the other person to see. If someone says something that lands like an insult, instead of firing back, you might ask, "Did you mean for that to upset me? Did you mean for that to sound rude? Or did you mean for that to embarrass me?" These questions force the speaker to confront the intent and impact of their words without you having to accuse them directly. They create a moment of pause where the other person must either clarify or own what they have said. In many cases, they will soften their stance or even retract their words because they are hearing them again through your question. Reflective questions are also a subtle way to communicate resilience. They show that the comment did not pierce you deeply enough to provoke an emotional reaction, but that you are willing to address it directly. In some situations, simply asking someone to repeat what they just said can have the same effect. Hearing their own words out loud a second time can make them realize how they sound. This technique is not about shaming the other person. It is about creating space for self-awareness to interrupt the cycle of escalation. It also works in text or written exchanges where tone can be misunderstood. Asking, "Should I read into that, or was that meant to be short?" can prevent assumptions from turning into arguments. The key is to keep your tone neutral and your body language open, as if you are genuinely seeking clarity rather than laying a trap. Over time, using reflective questions can change the way people speak to you because they know their words will be examined rather than met with instant retaliation. It shifts the dynamic from confrontation to accountability, which is often the first step toward more respectful and productive conversation. Some of the clearest lessons in communication come from ordinary moments when you are not expecting to be tested. It might happen at an airport, in a store, or while running errands. These small interactions reveal how quickly situations can turn tense and how much power you have to change the outcome. I remember standing in an airport after walking through the wrong security checkpoint, realizing I would have to go through the process all over again. A security agent pointed out my mistake in a blunt way, telling me it was my fault with no attempt to soften the delivery. In that moment, I could have matched her tone, turned it into a public argument, and walked away angrier than when it started. Instead, I asked a simple question: "Did you feel better saying that?" It was not sarcastic. It was calm and direct. To my surprise, her expression changed immediately. She apologized and admitted she was frustrated. The tension dissolved, and the conversation ended on a better note than it began. Encounters like this remind us that not every conflict requires force to resolve. Sometimes all it takes is holding up a mirror to let someone see their own behavior and giving them the space to correct it. Everyday moments like these are training grounds for bigger conversations. They give you a chance to practice staying composed. using curiosity instead of aggression, and keeping your sense of control without escalating the situation. Over time, you become more aware of your own triggers and more skilled at choosing responses that protect your peace. The airport incident was small, but the principle applies anywhere. Whether you are dealing with a stranger, a colleague, or someone close to you, you have the ability to shift the tone if you are willing to step out of the cycle of reaction. The key is to remember that your goal is not to win every exchange, but to walk away knowing you stayed aligned with the kind of person you want to be. That is a victory no one else can give or take away. Assumptions are one of the fastest ways to damage, trust, and derail a conversation. They fill the space between what was said and what we heard with stories of our own making, often shaped by mood, past experiences, or insecurities. In moments of high emotion, these stories tend to lean toward the negative. A short reply in a text becomes proof that someone is upset. A delayed response becomes evidence of avoidance. The danger is that once an assumption takes root, it can guide our words and actions as if it were fact. The antidote is simple in concept, but requires discipline in practice. Instead of assuming, clarify. Ask questions like, should I read into that? Was that meant to be short? Or am I hearing you correctly? These questions give the other person a chance to correct or confirm before misunderstandings grow. They also signal that you value accuracy over speed, that you are willing to pause the rush toward judgment in order to protect the connection. Clarifying is not about doubting everything you hear, it is about making sure you are reacting to reality rather than to a story in your head. This habit prevents countless unnecessary conflicts. It also shows respect because you are giving the other person the dignity of explaining themselves rather than assigning them an intent they may not have had. The skill is especially valuable in digital communication, where tone and nuance can be lost. A sentence meant casually can sound cold on a screen, and without clarification, it is easy to misinterpret. Choosing to ask rather than assume slows the escalation and often reveals that no harm was intended. Over time, practicing clarification builds trust on both sides. People learn that you will not jump to conclusions, and you learn that many perceived slights are simply misunderstanding. It creates a culture in your relationships where checking in is normal and welcome. This is how you keep conversations grounded in truth rather than in assumption, and how you ensure that emotion is guided by reality rather than by guesswork. In the end, clarity is a gift you give both to yourself and to those you speak with because it allows the conversation to move forward on solid ground.